All right, today we're firing up the amps and cranking the volume to get into the origin story of one of music's absolute loudest and most powerful genres, heavy metal. And trust me, it's a story that was literally forged in fire, noise, and a world that was changing fast. So, let's get right to it.
So here's the big question, right? How in the world did we get from the peace and love of the 60s to the absolute loudest noise of the 70s? I mean, think about it. The late 60s, that was all flower power, psychedelic dreams. So how did that utopian vibe completely sour and turn into this sound defined by thunderous drums, screaming distorted guitars, and lyrics about war and darkness? Well, that's the mystery we're going to unravel today.
Okay, so to really get this, you have to understand the mood at the time. Because as the 1960s were winding down, the whole world just started to feel, well, heavier.
I mean, just look at the contrast. You had the dream of flower power, but the grim reality was the Vietnam War raging on. You had this beautiful idea of psychedelic exploration, but then the shock of the Manson murders happened. And the Summer of Love in '67, just 2 years later, it all ended in the chaos and violence of the Altamont Festival. The whole hippie dream was basically dying. And this new, much darker reality? Well, it needed a soundtrack that could match that energy.
And you know where that soundtrack was born? It wasn't in sunny California. Not even close. It was forged in the industrial heartland of England, in a city called Birmingham.
I want you to just try and imagine living in a city that sounds like a giant machine. That was Birmingham. It was all steel foundries, smokestacks everywhere. The air was thick, and the constant daily soundtrack was just this rhythmic, nonstop clang of metal hitting metal. So for the working class kids growing up there, guys like the members of Black Sabbath, pretty folk music just didn't connect. It meant nothing to them. They needed music that sounded like their lives, something loud, repetitive, and just as gritty as the city they lived in.
But here's the thing. That specific sound of metal, that deep, dark, menacing tone, it wasn't just about the environment. The real spark, the thing that created the core sound, it was actually born from a pretty gruesome and totally pivotal accident.
Okay, this right here is basically the origin myth of the entire genre. You've got a young Tony Iommi, the guitarist for Black Sabbath, who loses the tips of 2 of his fingers in a factory press accident. I mean, that should have been it, right? Career over? But no, he creates these little makeshift plastic tips for his fingers, and, this is the crucial part, he down-tunes his guitar strings, slackens them to make it less painful to play. And the result of that? Well, that accidental change created a sound that was deeper, heavier, and just darker than anything anyone had ever heard before. The actual DNA of heavy metal wasn't engineered in a fancy studio. It was literally born from a factory accident, from pain, and just pure stubborn willpower.
Now, while Sabbath was busy literally inventing this new tone, you had other bands kind of paving the way. Bands like The Who were pushing the limits of volume, Blue Cheer was messing with crazy amounts of distortion, but the name came from a total fluke. It was the band Steppenwolf in their massive 1968 hit Born to Be Wild who just happened to throw in the lyric heavy metal thunder. And just like that, this brand new sound had a name.
So by 1970, all the pieces are finally in place. And then, almost all at once, 3 British bands emerge that would go on to define the 3 main pillars of what we now call heavy metal. And each of these bands brought something totally different to the table. You had Black Sabbath, who brought the pure darkness and the doom. Then there was Led Zeppelin, who brought this epic, mythological scale to it all, and really pioneered the idea of the guitar riff being the absolute foundation of the song. And finally, you had Deep Purple, who injected pure speed, almost classical-level musicianship, and those insane, soaring, air-raid vocals that became a huge part of the genre.
Let's zoom in on Sabbath for a sec, because they had a secret weapon. Their signature song, also called Black Sabbath, is built around this one musical interval called the tritone. Its other name? The Devil's Interval. It has this really dissonant, unsettling sound, so unsettling that legend says the church actually banned it back in the Middle Ages. So for Sabbath to use that as the foundation of their music, that was a deliberate choice. They were weaponizing it to create a feeling of pure dread and to draw a clear line in the sand between them and all the bluesy hard rock bands.
And the other essential building block? The power chord. It's so simple, just 2 notes. But the genius of it is that it's ambiguous. It isn't happy. It isn't sad. It's not major or minor. It's just power. And because it's so simple, it doesn't turn into a muddy mess when you crank up the distortion. It lets you create that massive, thick wall of sound that is the absolute signature of heavy metal.
Okay, so the sound is locked in.
But heavy metal was never just about the music, was it? The next crucial step was building a whole culture, a whole identity that was just as unique.
And by the mid-70s, something really important starts to happen. Black Sabbath had laid down the sound, no question. But it was another band, also from Birmingham, called Judas Priest, that was about to define what it meant to look and feel like heavy metal.
So musically, Judas Priest pretty much stripped away any of the leftover blues stuff. And then, led by their singer Rob Halford, they brought in the uniform. You know what I'm talking about? The leather, the studs. It became iconic. At the exact same time, you've got people like Alice Cooper turning concerts into these massive theatrical horror shows with guillotines and fake blood. And when you combine that distinct look with that shocking stage show, you get the identity of metal. Rebellious, powerful, and honestly, kind of thrillingly dangerous. You gotta remember, at first, heavy metal was an insult. Critics used it to call the music crude, noisy, just unsophisticated garbage. But here's the funny part. All that hate from the establishment, it had the complete opposite effect on the fans. It created this us versus them feeling. The more the critics hated it, the more the fans loved it. They took that insult and wore it like a badge of honor, and it helped forge this incredibly loyal, worldwide community.
And man, that thunder that was born back in 1970, it started to echo and evolve almost right away. You can see the direct line. The foundation laid by that first Holy Trinity led straight to Judas Priest, who then inspired a whole new wave of British heavy metal with bands like Iron Maiden, and that mutated into the faster, angrier thrash metal of the 80s with Metallica and Slayer. You can literally trace a straight line from Tony Iommi's factory accident in Birmingham to sold-out stadiums all across the globe.
So, that leaves us with one last big question. This music was such a direct reaction to a very specific time and place, right? The industrial grid of post-war Britain. So why does it still resonate so powerfully with so many people in so many different countries more than 50 years later? It's a great question to think about. Maybe it's because that need to just face the darkness and hit back with a powerful wall of sound. Maybe that's just a universal human thing.